And we're lucky to have Tony Taylor, who's probably the instigator of this whole thing, to give us some more context about why we're meeting here today and the history of this campaign.
I've had a proper odd week, really, and almost everything, while I've been thinking about things, the notion of loose cannons has kept coming up. Because I was thinking, over 20 years ago, just down the road here in Manchester Town Hall, Claire Short, the director of Youth Aid at the time, which was an organisation campaigning around unemployment, she took me aside after what I thought was this brilliant attack on the evils of capitalism. And she said to me, Tony, you're in danger of being dismissed as a loose cannon. And then lo and behold, on the telly, just this week, there's the very same Claire Short being described as a loose cannon within the new Labour cabinet. And at the same time, I've had a couple of emails this week, one of them from Lenny, who's in the room, reflecting on how their defence of youth work as a practice founded on young people's terms, not the state's terms, meant that they were being described as loose cannons by their management. And by the end of this, I was becoming quite fond of the notion of being a loose cannon, to be honest. And so I'm hoping that perhaps I'm speaking at this moment to a whole, a veritable army of loose cannons. Now, as it was, when we set up with the open letter in defence of youth work, when it hit the streets at Durham last March, there were already then notable shakers and movers within youth work describing us as irrelevant dinosaurs, if you like, clinging on to the past because we were frightened of the present. And the notion of dinosaurs with loose cannons is a pretty frightening thought. I have to admit, as we were starting, we were pretty anxious about what response there would be to our effort to dent the consensus that you couldn't do anything but obey New Labour's bidding. But our anxiety was misplaced, inspired by making contact with fellow travellers from the northeast on that day itself, who were worrying about the very same questions. We felt alive and not at all extinct. And since then, our collective confidence has grown in terms of thinking, well, we can have an impact on what's going on. And in fact, that's why we are here today. So, given time, I just want to underline a few points. The campaign's understanding by now, after about 10 months, is that we are a rich mix of people and a rich mix of analysis and anecdote. And by that I mean we've brought together what might be called intellectual activities, undertaken classically, I suppose, by Tony Jeffson, Mark Smith, and the names we could reel off. But at the same time as drawing on that intellectual activity, we've drawn on the insights of workers on the ground, experiencing what's going on. And I think within the campaign, we wish to bridge the divide between thinkers and doers. We are a company of thinkers who do and doers who think. And I think that's very important. Now, I think the campaign struck a chord because it's appeared, not at all by chance, just as the dominant ideology of neoliberalism has been lurching into acute crisis. So 3 decades of telling us that the market must rule, that the private is inherently efficient and the public innately wasteful, that self-centred individualism, looking after number one, is good, and social solidarity from below is doubtful. All that has blown up in the preposterous face of neoliberalism. A global capitalist economy, casino economy, in which the few played games with the lives of the majority, has had to be bailed out with our money. It's cost in a single year of backhanders to the money launderers and financial entrepreneurs. It's cost £1.7 trillion just to balance the books. And yet, of course, we are being told at this very moment that there is no money for public services, there is no money for youth work, that we must gird our loins, tighten our belts, and face a decade of pain. Now, one of the crucial contradictions of neoliberalism is that it deregulates the economy, but boy is it intent on also regulating the social and political. And in terms of youth work, the henchmen of neoliberalism, the new managerialists, have imposed that discourse of inputs and outputs and targets and outcomes upon us. As the letter says, we have been cajoled and coerced, but also intimidated into an acceptance of the very opposite of what we believe in terms of a young person-centred process. We have been asked to accept prescribed, predictable outcomes to our encounter with young people. New Labour does want to turn us into an agency of behavioural modification. And there's a sense in which youth work has become infected with a sort of misanthropy, a fear of young people and a deep distrust and mistrust of yourselves, of youth workers. So much of youth work has now become wedded to the needs of the system, to the requirements of the computer programme. It deceives itself that amassing quantitative data, obeying the diktat of government policy, means that youth work has come of age, that somehow it has now proven itself. Just to take a current example from last week, NYA has just launched its training programme in support of the 14 to 19 reform agenda, which sounded a bit sinister to me in the first place. And they held their first training day. Well, they must have had a bit of dosh because they hired the Dave Whelan Stadium over in Wigan. But when you look at the programme of that training day aimed at senior and middle management, its themes are employability, skills, accreditation, and that curious group of people called NEETs. Now, I know I'm an old-fashioned soul, and I'm thinking, yeah, fair enough, there's a dilemma about preparing young people for the world of work. But I never came into youth work to do that. But I thought, there used to be career services and schools and further education colleges, and they got on with that stuff, and I might have had a relationship with it. But the focus of my job was not about preparing people to be slaves in the economy. But now the National Youth Agency can run those programmes as if that is precisely our role. And it's against that backcloth that the open letter does display a certain partisan character. We are posing in the letter the question, do we want to defend all youth work? Youth work is a contested site of practice. It's called classically in that very old essay, is youth work an agency of social control or social change? And there are those in the campaign sitting in this room who want to assert that youth work equals the definition of democratic and emancipatory practice that's in the letter. And I'm quite seduced by that. But there are others who are not so sure. If the relationship is voluntary, why is the benevolent, authoritarian, like integrationist youth worker not a youth worker? I've worked alongside and managed workers who were loved by at least some young people who were very much leaders wanting to fit into society. Were they not doing youth work? And we must continue that discussion and not brush it under the carpet, whilst holding on to our definition, by being wary of alienated workers who for the moment have put their heads down, worried to put them above the parapets. But to speak of alienation also, I have to say strongly, means we have an enormous obligation to support the large number of isolated workers harassed and intimidated for standing up to the bureaucratic imperative, and to challenge the culture of so many organisations now where critical discussions in, say, the classic staff meeting are utterly suppressed. And we have to be aware of those who still like to spout the rhetoric about the youth work values, even as their practice denies utterly their words. They're of what I call the both sides buttered tendency. Of course, I may be dwelling too long in the corner into which we've been shoved, and I know there are individuals and groups in this room who are preserving a collective integrity and in the teeth of this onslaught, and it'll be inspiring to hear your stories during the day. But a central proposal of the campaign that echoes, I think, what Janet says, is there is no party line in this room. There is much to argue through together. And just to touch on some of the issues that I know will percolate today and tomorrow that have come up during the year. There is a question, is there a unique youth work value base? Is that a notion a help or a hindrance? Is the turn to ethics? There are 3 books out on ethics appear in the next few months. Howard Zier, who's got a new book out, and Sarah's having a 2nd edition agreed. Is that emphasis on individual practitioners' moral dilemmas something of a flight from collective political practice? Is professionalisation simply a good thing? What are the implications for the whole of the youth work sector of the emphasis on a graduate profession and the licence to practice? Shouldn't the campaign be embracing community work? Aren't its principles of engagement the same? Have we compromised our informal educational commitment by being sucked into claims that youth work can be measured in terms of reductions in youth crime, reductions in antisocial behaviour? Isn't it seductive that haven't we accepted too much a welfare agenda at that point? And something that interests me, seeing we're in this institution, over the last 40 years or so, youth work training agencies have held in one way or another to a commitment to critical theory, to wanting there to be critical, reflective practitioners. Even now, recent books by Janet Battsleer and Kate Sappin have tried to deepen that tradition of creating critical, reflective practitioners. So how come, where's this creeping intrusion of adolescent psychology, which I thought was totally discredited, dressed up as positive youth development? How's that found its way, wormed its way such more into the work? And even pseudo-scientific fabrications and mumbo-jumbo, such as neuro-linguistic programming. I'm saying that because I looked on the website of one of the most famous outdoor education places in the country, and every single member of that staff seem to proudly have brackets NLP after their name. And I'd like to know who's agreed that that is acceptable and appropriate. In a recent article, Bernard Davis pondered, can youth workers, but particularly senior managers, now imagine a world without targets? And I think that's a question also for all of us. How far has that neoliberal individualism in a way permeated all our thinking about the way the world is? And the last question there, and we are haunted as ever by, if we're going forward, how might we forge a democratic and accountable relationship with young people themselves? It's pretty rare that that collective political connection is made. Perhaps rarely when there have been fights around local cuts have young people and youth workers actually stood side by side. Critically, the campaign cannot be isolated. Other parts of the welfare state, schools, social services, have felt the dead hand of the institutionalised market logic long before us. We're a bit last in the queue, to be honest. And we have made links now with the Social Work Action Network, we're on their steering group, and with the National Coalition for Independent Action. And we do want to reach out to and learn from workers from Wales and Scotland and Ireland, where devolution practice has created somewhat different circumstances, with much to teach one another. In the last months, our efforts have been described as romantic. Now, I've been called worse. Indeed, I can already see the t-shirt, I am a romantic youth worker. And the notion of romantic dinosaurs running around with loose cannons is a very frightening prospect. Now, the letter talks about the integrity of the youth worker, fashioning a serious yet a humorous, an improvisatory yet a rehearsed practice with young people. We need such a creative collective practice together today in this room and tomorrow within this campaign. folk of my political disposition are fond of the slogan, so it is tempting to say, romantic youth workers of the world unite, we have nothing to lose but the shackles of our targets. But I do think today we're in an unusual situation that Janet has expressed eloquently. It's, I think, a long time since such a diversity of workers from all over the shop came together under their own steam, unauthorised, as Janet says, to discuss and act together. So let's not throw this opportunity away. And to end on a more poetic note, in Emily Dickinson's famous phrase, imagination is the fuse of possibility. We can achieve what might, at the moment, seem impossible. Thanks for listening.